Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the press conference. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, et bienvenue à la conférence de presse. I would now like to turn the meeting over to Minister Bill Morneau. J'aimerais maintenant céder la parole au ministre Bill Morneau. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and good morning. Canadians know that we've been very focused over the course of this crisis on Canadians, on their jobs, on their continuing opportunity to work for both small and large employers. Today, I want to talk about the program that we're putting in place for large employers to help them get through this particularly challenging time. As you know, millions of Canadians work for large employers. We want to make sure that those large organizations get the bridge financing that they need so that they can keep Canadians employed, so that Canadian families know where their next check is coming from, so that the smaller businesses that supply our large employers have assurances as well. And that goes for their workers. That's why last week we introduced the Large Employer Emergency Financing Facility that will provide large firms with the liquidity to get through to the other side of this crisis and will protect Canadian jobs. Today, I'm here to announce that the application process is now open. Funds will be delivered through the Canada Enterprise Emergency Funding Corporation, a subsidiary of Canada Development Investment Corporation, CDEV, in cooperation with ISED and the Department of Finance. Large employers that have a significant presence in Canada, with an annual revenue of $300 million or more, with financing needs of $60 million or more that have not been met by their usual means, can apply. You can visit CDEV's website for more information.
Today, we're announcing that the application process for the LEAF program is to be opened. This provides emergency funding through a subsidiary of CDEV in cooperation with ISED and the Department of Finance. You can visit our website, the CDEV website, for further details.
The Large Employer Financing Facility provides employers with a lower interest rate during this crisis, but we're putting in place loan conditions that will protect Canadians. 20% of the aggregate funding will be what's called senior debt, secured alongside existing secured lenders. This will ensure that existing lenders share in the risk. The remaining 80% will be an unsecured loan set with a low 5% interest rate in the first year to help companies bridge through COVID, increasing to 8% in the second year. In order to help companies keep cash available during the crisis and recovery, cash that can be used to create jobs and do that as business picks up, they have the option to make larger payments after COVID or at the end of the first 2 years. At any time, borrowers can repay the loan with no penalty. To further protect Canadian taxpayers and to make sure that they share in any upside borrowers see in the recovery to come, we'll be asking publicly traded companies to issue warrants that provide the option to purchase equity or receive cash equivalents, totaling 15% of the amount received. If borrowers aren't publicly traded, they will pay comparable fees. These terms ensure that this financing facility provides financing to bridge through this difficult time, but not bailouts.
This LEAF program offers a lower interest rate to companies during the crisis, and we will guarantee the loans. 20% of the aggregate debt will be considered senior debt, guaranteed by existing loaners or lenders. And then there will be a 5% interest rate for the first year that will increase to 8% in the second year. At any time, the loan can be paid back without penalty in order to better protect taxpayers and ensure that they share in the profits that companies may earn in the future. We will call on publicly traded companies to issue warrants, which will allow for the purchase of stocks for a total of 15% of the total amount. If corporations are not publicly traded, they will pay comparable rates.
Need to demonstrate how they will preserve jobs and maintain essential investment activities. They'll also need to uphold collective bargaining agreements and protect workers' pensions. There'll be strict limitations on dividends, on share buybacks, and on executive pay. And there'll be requirements on environmental sustainability and tax transparency.
Corporations will have to demonstrate how they are going to protect jobs and maintain their investment activities. We will assess the amount to be loaned on a case-by-case basis based on need. But the same criteria will apply to all.
On a case-by-case basis based on demonstrated need. But the terms and conditions will be consistent for all. This isn't only about fairness. It also makes sure that support can be delivered in a timely manner. We want to make sure that employers get the support they need to get through to better times, so that Canadian jobs are protected. Companies that apply for this financing can also continue to apply for and receive the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which we've now extended through until August 29th. Our economic response plan is about providing broad-based support across our economy. We're committed to helping employees at companies, big and small, in every corner of the country, because we know that we're all in this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Operator. We're going to proceed with questions now. If we can just make sure that folks ask a question and a follow-up, and if you require French, please say so at the beginning. Thank you. Over to you, Operator.
Thank you. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. Veuillez s'il vous plaît appuyer sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Our first question is from Kate Bolongaro from Bloomberg. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Hello, Mr. Morneau. I'm wondering about more details about the warrants. Will the policy of the government be to seek warrants in all cases, and how will the terms be negotiated?
Well, thank you for the question. What we've done here is make sure that we're providing a low level of interest in the first year, but one that's appropriate so that employers that seek this will first go to their own sources of finance. The idea behind the warrant is to make sure that if a firm does well, that Canadians and Canadian taxpayers share in that upside. It will not be there in every case. If a company is publicly traded, the warrant will be there. Canadian government will not be required to take that value in shares. It can take it in cash. In the case of private companies, there'll be a cash equivalent in fees that will be put in place so that they will also pay the similar sort of price.
Follow-up question?
So it didn't really answer the question. I'm wondering in terms of seeking of warrants in publicly traded companies, will that be standard across the board? And how will those specific terms be negotiated with the company?
Yes, they will be standard across the board. So we've put in place terms that will be there on the term sheet that will see that there's standardized warrants across the board. Our broad approach here is that we recognize that we need to support businesses across all sectors of the economy because we're really trying to ensure that employment continues. And in that regard, we think that the best way to do that is to have standardized terms, both in terms of interest rates and in terms of the warrants that are required for publicly traded companies.
Thank you. Operator, next question.
Thank you. Our following question is from la prochaine question est de Philippe Vincent Foisy de Radio-Canada. À vous la parole, please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Morneau. A technical question. I can't hear you.
Sorry, Operator, can you add them to this? We just lost them.
Just one moment. We lost the gentleman, so we'll...
go to the next question. We can come back to him after.
Certainly. So, Mr. Foisy, please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Yes, can you hear me? Great. When will large corporations applying today be able to get the money? Answer. The reason we decided to open applications today is to get the money out as quickly as possible with standard terms. That money, well, the application can be made right away and be processed. And that way, the approach will be to get the money out the door as quickly as possible. My second question, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business says at least 20% of companies are in fear of being evicted because they would need extra money to pay their rent. Is it possible the money won't get to them quick enough? Answer. That's a very good question. We know that for small and medium-sized businesses, rent can be very hard to pay without revenue, of course, and that is why we came up with a program with the support of the provinces. We will have further details soon, and in that way, we would like to see people using that program. Of course, as with any program, if there are any changes or improvements that could be made, we will consider that. But that program will help small and medium-sized businesses and will boost the economy with a greater certainty for the future.
Next question.
Our next question is from Bill Curry from the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Hi, Minister. Just to go back to the warrants, the documents talk about the option to purchase the borrower's common shares totaling 15% of the principal amount or receive cash equivalent. Are there scenarios where the federal government would be owning more than that share? And presumably when you came up with this program, you looked at CDEV's role with GM and Chrysler following the 2008-09 recession. Canada, the taxpayers never got their full money back on that transaction. So how does this program compare with what the federal government did in that scenario?
Well, let me take the second half of that question first, Bill. I think people will compare this program to what happened in 2008, 2009, but of course it's quite different. At that stage, GM Chrysler was actually in bankruptcy proceedings. What we're trying to achieve here is to make sure firms don't go into bankruptcy. So we're trying to provide a bridge financing to help people get through this challenging time and actually preserve the organization, preserve the jobs for the future. With respect to the warrants, as I mentioned, they're meant to be standardized. So we're not seeking to have different terms with different companies, and the government's not required to take equity. The government can actually take the cash equivalent of those warrants. So we're looking forward to trying to be supportive of businesses that are going through extreme stress. We know that's the best way to support employees at this time.
And as a follow-up, you had mentioned when this program was announced that you thought it would be of interest to airlines, and the program is also supposed to require companies to minimize the loss of employment. So in that light, what is your reaction to Air Canada's decision to go ahead with large layoffs?
We know that in many cases businesses will be going through extreme challenges. What we've said is that we want to provide support. We want businesses to try to minimize any employment loss. We do recognize that some businesses will need to go through structural change. That's going to be a reality during this challenging time. But we've been clear. We're trying to support workers. We're asking that employers work to minimize that loss of jobs. Our best case scenario, of course, is that we preserve firms, we preserve jobs, and we get ourselves through this time and face up to what will be the next challenge.
Thank you. Operator, prochaine question.
Thank you. Our next question is from Steve Shearer from Reuters. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Good morning, Minister. I wanted to ask, first of all, if there was an upper limit to the loans for each company. And you said that the amount that each company would get would be determined needs-based. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you will determine the need?
Well, thanks. That's an important question. I mean, first of all, what we've said is the threshold size company for this program is really $300 million plus, and it'll be available to organizations, including organizations like airports that have extreme challenges. The size of the loan has a lower bound. We're expecting that the lower bound is $60 million or so, but it doesn't have a necessary upper bound. It's based on the needs for the organization for the next 12 months. So we're really looking at those cash flow needs for the next 12 months to try and bridge through the COVID-19 crisis. That'll be the frame for our consideration.
Thank you. As a follow-up, I was wondering, due to all of the emergency spending right now, how concerned are you about Canada's AAA rating? And could you just expand on that, please?
We're in a position right now, obviously, that's very fluid. I think the way to think about our credit standing is our starting point, which was strong. The lowest amount of debt as a function of our economy among G7 countries. And then what we'll be looking at is our strength coming out of this. And we think that the support we're providing for employees and for employers with a program like this financing today will enable them to come out of this crisis and leave us with a stronger economy. And that strong economy is essentially what those rating agencies look at in order to determine our ongoing health. So I continue to view Canada as in a very strong position. We're working hard to preserve our employment and our economy for the long term, and we'll continue to take that approach. We believe it's important to make sure that we get through this and get back to to growing our economy together, which will help us to be successful and also help to ensure that our cost of debt is low because of strong credit ratings.
Thank you. Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question est de Hélène Buzetti du Devoir. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Morneau.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Morneau. I'd like to come back to the wage subsidy. You announced that would be extended and that the criteria might be revisited. I'd like to hear what you have to say about how effective this system is and how fair it is. If a company loses 28% of its revenues, it'll get zero, but a company next door that's lost 30% of their revenues will get a huge wage subsidy. Is that fair in your view? Is that progressive? Given the injustice in the system, some companies would be penalized, whereas others wouldn't. Thank you. That's a good question. As usual, we considered our approach and what the necessary criteria would be in a very difficult situation. That was the reason for the wage subsidy. That was one of the criteria, that you needed to have a drop of 30% in revenue. But as the economy opens up, we'll have to reconsider whether those are the right criteria for the next steps. And that's why we explained that we would look at potentially extending the program until the end of August. And, well, we announced that, but we also said that we would consider whether the criteria needed to be massaged because the situation evolves from month to month. So that's what we're thinking about right now. And when we have more to say about that, we will set out the next steps. Yes, I understand that with things starting up again, that 30% criterion could be revisited. But my question was about the injustice of having a switch at 30%. At 29%, you don't qualify, but at 30% revenue loss, you do. Doesn't that create some sort of injustice between companies, among companies? Answer. That's why we are going to reconsider the criteria. We know that the criteria are appropriate for the situation as it stood 2 or 3 months ago, but that will change in the near future. So we are currently considering making changes, as I said, and one of the things we will consider is the situation you explained.
Thank you. Merci. Notre prochaine question. Our next question is from Murad Emadi from The Logic. Please go ahead.
Minister Morneau, you said that these loans are designed for companies that haven't been able to access, I believe, when you first announced them, access credit in through the normal channels. Will there be some sort of attestation or proof required that they weren't able to get this money through the regular means?
Well, thank you. What's going to happen in terms of the administrative approach for this is that I'll be working together with my colleague Navdeep Bains and with his department, the Department of Innovation, Science and Industry, to look at companies that are coming into this program to make sure that it's appropriate. And we think that's essential. One of the things will be that the company will come in and give the information required for them to come into this program. They need to ensure for us that they're protecting workers, so protecting collective agreements and pensions, for example, that they're protecting taxpayers, that they're not doing share buybacks or giving out dividends, and that they've got limitations on executive compensation, that they're thinking about our environmental commitments, that they're putting forth climate-related financial disclosures and telling us how they're going to contribute to our environmental goals in 2050. So there will be those sorts of conditions, and the company themselves will have to choose whether the financing is appropriate for their needs or not. If they have other sources of capital, presumably they'll go to those sources of capital first. We're not expecting this to be low-cost capital, but it's really meant to support these firms through this challenging time based on their need for capital that they can't get in other ways.
And will loans be forgivable?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Sorry. Will any portion of these loans be forgivable?
No. The approach we've taken to providing support for businesses, small and large, is recognize that across all spectrums of size, businesses are going to need credit to get through this time. For the smallest of organizations, for those organizations that have up to $1.5 million in salary, for example, we're saying for those organizations they're getting a $40,000 loan, and up to 25% of that can be forgivable. That's at the very small end. But as we go to the largest firms, we think that what's appropriate is that we provide financing. We provide financing that's lower in cost for the first year, but that recognizes that we want firms to find their own source of capital after they get through this time, and that provides protection for taxpayers. So that's how we've taken this approach. We think it's appropriate to support workers and large employers, and respects the needs for the Canadian government and taxpayers to be protected.
Thank you. Operator, next question.
Thank you. Our next question is from Greg Queen from Market News. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Good morning, Minister. I'm wondering if you can outline your thinking around the potential for taking seats on the boards of large public companies that get this money. In the private world, when you buy up a significant amount of shares, you often ask for a board seat, and the government has taken control or board seats of public companies in the past.
Well, first of all, I want to be clear that we're talking about an interest rate and a warrant, but no requirement for the government to take equity. However, in the terms, we do have the right to have an observer to the board of directors, which we think is appropriate for financing of this kind.
Secondly, sir, on provincial finances, the provinces are facing higher healthcare costs, and the government is providing some money for that. Do you expect to see pressure for a permanent increase of funding for provinces who are already struggling with their own deficits?
Well, I've been doing this job for about 5 years now, and I get constant pressure from every direction for sources of finance, and certainly that comes from the provinces. We know that COVID-19 has put strain on provinces, it's put strain on municipalities, and it's put strain on businesses across the country. So I expect that we'll have continuing discussions about those strains. We've been very supportive. The Bank of Canada has been very supportive of provinces by helping to ensure that they're able to issue debt. So we'll continue to think about how we can work together. I think we've demonstrated an approach that recognizes that working together matters on things like providing rent for small businesses, providing essential worker income top-ups. We've worked closely with the provinces to get to outcomes that we think put us in a better situation.
Thank you. Operator, next question.
Thank you. Notre prochaine question est de Émilie Bergeron de l'agence QMI. À vous la parole, please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Morneau.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Morneau. When you announced this program, you stated that companies that had been guilty of tax evasion would not qualify for this assistance. You must have some idea of what companies you're talking about. How many companies would be disqualified? How many have been found guilty of tax evasion? And what companies would that be, for example? Who wouldn't qualify? Answer. Our approach is broader than that. 5 years ago, we did various things with our international counterparts to ensure that our system is working and to make it harder to avoid paying taxes. That is an approach that we continue with. So it's harder and harder for big corporations to break the rules around the world. Secondly, every company that wants to qualify for our program has to use that funding for Canadian operations, for situations here in Canada, to ensure that the investments are here, that the workers are here. That's very important. Third, we have to consider companies that have had tax evasion, tax avoidance problems. We have to keep that in mind. That's very important. So we have to look at the tax situation of corporations, but I think that our approach ensures that companies will make their investments here in Canada with the funding provided through this program.
Thank you. Operator.
Okay,
Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
Oui, merci. J'ai pas vraiment...
I don't think you answered my question. How many companies have been found guilty, have been convicted of tax avoidance, and therefore will be disqualified for this assistance? And the other question I had was that there are a lot of criteria, a lot of conditions attached to this assistance, including environmental criteria. How long will it take for these companies to get the money? Answer. Good question. As I said, tax evasion is serious, and companies will not get this funding if they've been convicted of tax evasion. Second, with respect to the environmental criteria, we've explained that companies have to ensure that they have an approach that guarantees that they will make information available about their environmental impact. That's very important. So to get the funding, there will have to be an attestation, but our approach will ensure that money flows as quickly as possible. Applications are open as of today, so the money will come very quickly.
We're going to move towards the last two questions now. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Paul Vieira from Wall Street Journal. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Minister, the head of CMHC offered some very sobering warnings about where the real estate market is headed. He's talking about 20% of mortgages being in arrears by the fall, a price correction of up to 18%. Are you not worried that real estate or Canadian housing, which has been a strong driver of growth, is in fact going to be a drag and thwart the economy's attempt to recover from this virus-induced slowdown?
We're obviously paying attention to all sectors of the economy that are going through stress as a result of COVID-19. We certainly have seen the slowdown in home transactions, which is to be expected given that people have been under lockdown. We will see continuing points of stress in our economy. What we're trying to do today, and what we've been trying to do throughout this, is to provide a bridge for people through to the future. And that bridge is for individuals, which will help them to do things like service their mortgage. And it's a bridge for companies, which will keep employment, which I think, as you know, employment is the key issue around people's ability to keep their homes. So that's been our continuing approach. Working with the banks has been an important aspect of the last couple of months, and we've seen a very large number of mortgage deferrals as a result of the conclusions that we've gotten to with the banks, which are supporting people in this challenging time. And what I'm trying to make sure is that we have a strong economy coming out, and that strong economy is really what provides the opportunity for, as I said, good jobs and people to not only continue servicing their mortgage, but to continue thinking about, buying their first house if that's what they want to do.
Okay, then maybe talked about buying the first house then. Yesterday, the head of CMHC also suggested that, perhaps it's time to reconsider the minimum down payment on a house from 5%. Current 5% to maybe increase it 10%. Is that something the government has been looking at or talking to CMHC about, or is even considering?
One of the things that we're trying to make sure we do, Paul, is consider the things we need to do during this emergency time as things that are very focused on the emergency. So you see this large enterprise financing that we've announced the details for today. It's open during the time of the COVID-19 crisis. You see our employee supports as being during this time. So there will be time for us to think about systemic issues like the one you just brought up, whether there's long-term changes we need to make. But we're not looking at those potential long-term changes right now. We're very much focused on these issues that are part of the emergency, and thinking, as we are with the wage subsidy, about how we might look at our programs in a way that encourages us to get back to work in a gradual and appropriate way. So that's our focus today, and we'll continue to take that approach. Thanks.
Thank you. Operator, we're going to move to the last question now.
Thank you. La dernière question est de Louis-Samuel Perron de La Presse. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour.
Yes, good morning. In concrete terms, Mr. Morneau, what mechanism will be used to make sure that this money doesn't go to executive bonuses and pay raises? Answer: we will put in place conditions that will protect the Government of Canada and taxpayers. That's necessary. One thing is that there will be a condition whereby you cannot increase pay for executives more than current conditions. And so we will be able to look at each situation as a loan. That's our approach. And if there's a problem, our approach will allow us to say to companies that if you do not obey our conditions, you will be in default. That will be our approach, as it would be in a commercial situation. For my follow-up question, there are some pretty harsh conditions in some sectors with high interest rates. The warrants you're creating, are you not concerned that not many companies will be attracted to this program? Answer. Well, I can't say how many organizations will be interested in this program, but I believe that it's very important to have a facility that will help companies facing major challenges. What I would like to see is a situation where companies consider their revenues, their usual sources of credit, and after that, if there's still a problem for them, they have the option of turning to this government program. That's our approach. That will protect taxpayers, but at the same time, it will protect employees and employers in the future. It will protect their future. And I hope companies will have an opportunity to do what they would do on their own, but if not, we will be there to protect companies for the future and workers for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, operator. That concludes today's press conference.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Merci. The conference has now ended. Please disconnect your lines at this time, and we thank you for your participation. La conférence est maintenant terminée. Veuillez s'il vous plaît raccrocher votre ligne et merci à tous les participants qui se sont joints.